Hello, in this session we will be talking about creating drafting views in order to document your details and similar type of views like a partition type or the wall type schedule. So far we've set up a few different types of view. We had a legend, which is a actual legend command. We had keynotes, which was a note block scheduled command, and then sheet notes were actually a drafting view. And all of the subsequent views for details are also going to be drafting views. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between all of the different views. So legends, what's specific about legends is they can occur on multiple sheets. For example, you might have two partition plans, or if you have 10-story building, you might have 10 partition plans. So you want to repeat the same legend on multiple sheets. You can also put the same schedule on multiple sheets. Those are the only two type of views that will go on multiple sheets, and in a browser they're sorted as their own category. Drafting views, on the other hand, are specific, and they are sheet specific, so they cannot be placed on multiple. So they naturally follow the rule of show it once, show it right. Any type of documentation that you only want to show once would go onto a drafting view. And same as legend, they are actually scaled views. So let's go to our view tab and create a new drafting view. Now first thing, you need to name it and give it a scale. So talking just quickly about naming, you want to name things so the way they sort in your browser, all the drafting views can sort together, or you can, if you have a lot of details, you can subdivide them by type. And because in a lot of pull down menus and cross-referencing, only part of the long name will show, you want to make sure that the most information by which you'll be sorting will be showing first. So for example, instead of putting down break room cabinet detail, well, which cabinet, multiple in a break room, so I would name it base cabinet, or even a base cab, so it denotes specifically what it is. And if I had a base toe kick, then it would be base toe kick or counter. And then the location, so break room, you might have a different base cabinet. In the conference room, or in the training room, or in a lecture room, a classroom, where you might have. So I actually have already one created detail for break room, so let's say this one goes to the conference room. Also, same as with elevations, don't bother writing down elevation. Again, in the browser, things are already sorting that way, and it's pretty obvious the detail is a detail. The details are generally just one box wide on a sheet, and because the tile runs across in single line, you don't want to waste additional space. You want to be descriptive about what the detail represents, not about saying that it's a detail. So for something like this, base cabinet, the appropriate scale would be 1 inch to 1 foot. This is pretty much as large as details get. So this would be a full cabinet. For example, detail of a cabinet countertop or toe kick, we might do 3 inches to 1 foot, which is also known as quarter scale. Not quarter inch, quarter scale, so that's quarter of the full size. 6 inches to 1 foot is half size, and then 1.5 inch to 1 foot is 8 size, and then we have the 1 inch to 1 foot. So those are the most common, and then sometimes we do things in full scale when we're really zooming in. So those are the most common scales, and since I'll start with a cabinet, here is I'm going to use 1 inch to 1 foot. Now the next thing we want to do, we want to denote the border, how large this detail can be on a sheet. As I said, we usually keep the details to one box unless they're particularly large. For example, if we're showing all of the partition types in one single details, and that might get large depending on how many details we have. So I'm going to go to Annotate tab, and since drafting views are completely two-dimensional and there is no modeling to them, everything we'll be doing from this point on is in the Annotate tab. So I'll use a symbol, and you probably remember we made the legend template earlier on. So for the family for the detail, we'll use something really similar. We just need to configure it a little bit. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to edit this family. And what I did here, instead of having the extra line on the top, because for legends the tile is on top, and also for sheet notes, for details we put the tile on the bottom when we set it up on sheet. So we need to have an extra border along the bottom, so there is plenty of space to place the tile in that 1/2 inch on the bottom, and then 1/2 inch border around. Also, in the legend we have the little legend components and then the bigger text on the right. When we're dealing with details, we're drawing a detail, so we need more space for that, and we allocated about 2 inches for the text on the right, so more drawing and less description. So that's different from the legend. And I just named this the detail template to differentiate it from the legend template. It's still a symbol, just modify the previous one. So I'm going to load it into the project. And here is the detail template. So it's telling me how much space at this particular scale I have to draw something in a view. And just to show you, so drawing with the detail line, if I have a cabinet, so standard cabinet height is 2 feet and 10 inches, and then it's usually about 2 feet wide. So base cabinet would be about this size. So as you can see, this is a good size to represent the entire cabinet, and we would probably locate it a little bit towards the bottom right hand corner. Now if I change the scale, just to give you the idea, quarter scale, it would only be able to put a little part of this cabinet, so it's appropriate for just a toe kick or for a countertop detail. Or if I go larger on a scale, so like I said, 1 inch to 1 foot is pretty much as large as we get. Half scale, this cabinet becomes small. 1/2 inch scale, not half scale, 1/2 inch scale is essentially just another variation to elevation size scale. It's really zoomed in elevation. So I'm dictating the elevations at a 1/4 inch. 3/8 of an inch is also popular, and occasionally we'll use 1/2 inch when there's a lot of detail to the particular elevation. So for this cabinet, we are set up with 1 inch to 1 foot, and next we're going to look at the different tools to actually draw this detail. Now that we set up our detail, our drafting view, let's look at some of the strategies for drawing the drafting view. You can always use the detail lines and the filled regions, and then we'll annotate with text and such. But there is also the detail component that I wanted to talk about. Now, sometimes if you're just working on a legend, it might be grayed out, and you might think, oh, my component's not working. This is a little bit deceiving. If you go to the pull-down menu and go to the detail component, it will actually load the options for the detail component. Now, if you never used one of these, it might not be loaded, so let's look at the Imperial Library and where the detail components are contained. So if we go to the Imperial Library, you're probably familiar with a lot of the other categories, but detail items are sorted by the divisions of the master format that we learned when we talked about specifications. So even though we're not writing a complete construction spec using the master format, this is something to be familiar with. It's a standard way, industry standard, to sort different categories of materials. So for wood, for cabinetry, we would go to wood and plastic. Now here you might have a wood framing, which will give you cut lumber. So if you need section, if you need to show this, you can just load the standard shapes and sizes. And there's also a side view and a top view, and almost everything is, you'll see there are 3 different views. And so if you go to sheeting, you'll notice that these sections are only just a single section. These type of families are usually stretchable, so if you load a plywood or a particle board, which I'll demonstrate, you can actually draw a line and it draws it to the thickness with the fill that's appropriate. So it's really good to use some of these standards. Architectural woodwork, will have a laminate section, which is pretty thin and generally not necessarily required. But if you wanted to load trims, so standard, very traditional trim pieces, but they are available, and also stair nosings, railings, and so on. Again, traditional wood construction. As you can tell, Revit original version was actually targeted towards residential. Now for millwork, we have millwork section, side, and top. Again, section has the filled region, has the hatch that's denoting it's a section, and these are in predetermined sizes. So if we open this, it's actually going to ask you which sizes you want to load. Now, sometimes when this is not too long, you might want to load all the sizes and just click OK. If you're looking for a particular size of something that comes in a lot of different sizes, you might just want to pick that particular one. And this will give you, so these are nominal, so for 1 by 6, it's actually 3/4 of an inch by 5.5. And it's really nice to have this reference so you're able to work with some standard sizes as you're creating your own details. Now, it doesn't add too much weight to the project. These are two-dimensional components, and it's not as bad as loading complicated furniture families, but still don't go overboard. If you try to load steel, for example, there will be dozens and dozens of different sizes and options. So load what you need. Now, aside from detail components, we also use detail lines extensively. And if you wanted to add your own thicknesses, as we do need to abide by the line hierarchy, so the cuts are the thickest lines, hatches and the lines that are further set back are thinnest lines. Thinking back about what we learned about elevations when we did AutoCAD drafting or drafting by hand, it applies to the details. Details are really zoomed in, so the line hierarchy is really important. So again, anything that we're cutting is going to be a dark line, and usually we'll show the thickness of the cut, and then if it's an elevation, slightly lighter, and then if it's further set back, or if it's just a surface treatment, it will be even a thinner line. So under additional settings in the Manage tab, you can manage your line styles. And you can always add new lines here and customize them. Now in this particular file, there is a series of lines set up. So you can see that you have the one projection thickness, and then you have the different types of dashed lines, including the solid line, 2, 3, and so 5, 6, and 7 we use a little bit less often. But the defaults by Revit usually don't give you enough variety. Generally you have the thin line, which is a 1, medium line, which is a 3, and wide line, which is a 5. For details, using 5 for cuts is fine. And but then between 1 and 3 you do want to have a line that's a 2, and you probably want to have a 4. So you probably want to have the range as shown here between 1 to 5, and have options on the different dashes, so the hidden line or whatever, and they'll be depending on the scale is dictating if we are actually going to see the dash depending on the scale of the view. So just keep that in mind. We don't use colors for lines to denote line weights as we do in AutoCAD, if anybody's thinking back to that. So we're just using everything as black, unless again you want to have something denoting existing or setback, we would use a dark gray. Generally for existing elements, we will use it dark gray and possibly even a diagonal hatch. So that much about line styles. And then also we can customize our fill patterns. So there are all of the various drafting fill patterns. And as I said, different materials and just the hatch of the material, you can usually load them with the detail components. So like plywood here, you can just load plywood. But also you can create your own custom patterns too, and fill regions to show things that might not be already loaded. You can also use fill region with the thickness of the line around it. For example, a lot of times we might use sand to show quartz type of countertop, which doesn't have a specific designation in the library, and then use thick border line to show the shape of the counter. And I'll show an example how to do that. So these are the different things that we would use. So let's see how we would draw this base cabinet. So first I want to anchor it with lines and draw the corner. Now, and I'm going to use, as I mentioned, the 5 solid thick line. So here I'm denoting the line of the wall and also the line of the floor. So this is my corner. One common mistake when drawing cabinets is people will draw also the detail and all of the construction inside of the wall. They will show exactly what's going on with the floor, and that makes it really specific. Now, if you're only installing this cabinet on top of the concrete floor, great, it shows that particular detail, but then you cannot use the same detail for a different location. So you do want to be as generic as possible in the portions that are not necessary to the detail. So this could be installed next to a variety of walls, and the walls will be denoted in the wall schedule. You also want to run your corner as close as possible, and you can even put it on a line off of the edge, because everything is going to be drawn beyond that, and we try to keep all of the text in the text box on the side. Okay, so usually I'll block things out in the detail line. So now I might use a thinner 2 solid line. Then I know that my kick space, so I'm drawing in full scale as far as the dimensions go. And if my cabinet is 2 feet, the kick space is inside 3 inches. So this is the space for the kick. And then for the rest of the cabinets, I'll have 3 inches. And I will go up to 210 minus 4. There is a little bit of math involved here. And then the thickness of the countertop is 1.5. So this is the outline of my cabinet. Now I'll add some blocking. So using the component, I will block out my base here. And now I mentioned that you can use, looking for particle board here, so you can use particle board or plywood to construct the cabinet. So I have 3/4 of an inch. So I have 3/4 of an inch. And then I can also change the thickness. We usually don't use anything thicker than 1/2 of an inch for cabinetry, and might use even something thinner, and automatically I'm going to get a hatched thickness here. And then I'll go around and draw the rest of the cab. So this is what my cabinet might look like. So I blocked out the bottom and framed the cabinet. I have a couple of attachment pieces here to the back. And for attachments I usually don't use the nails, I might just use detail lines. Make sure you say frequently. So maybe a slightly thicker detail line, just to show that there is an attachment here. And I would also note that these pieces are attached to the ground. So we usually, the base cabinets, they are anchored to the ground and then to the wall so they don't tip over. I'm assuming a flash overlay door, so the door overlays the cabinet, and here at the top I left a little bit of extra space to build out the countertop around it. I might actually have another layer here to wrap laminate countertop, or if I have a solid surface counter, which I'm going to show it this way. I'm showing a shelf, so make sure, again, the lines are set back. This is the face of the cab, this is the actual face of the door, so we're showing all of the layers, and we overestimated that, so overemphasize it in details. And I might have a line of dots or little circles here showing that this is an adjustable shelf, and I could also use some detail lines to draw my door handle. So I'll use detail lines for that. And since this is just an elevation and not being cut, I can use something thin like 1 or possibly a 2. So now I'm showing the adjustable height shelf and a very simple door handle. And then the final thing, I'm going to use the filled region to draw my solid surface countertop. And for that, I want to have a sand fill. So since I don't have an option for that yet, I will create my own custom type. It's a solid surface. And I want a dashed sand look, as I said, so I'm looking for sand. So this is what it's denoting. This is the actual drafting view. And then I can denote the line weight for any type of masking. Okay, and then the other thing, so previously I used invisible lines for the legend. Now I want to have a thicker line because I'm showing something that's being cut. So not as thick as the wall cut as a 5, but I do want at least a 4 solid denoting a cut there. 3 depending on the view, so 3 or 4. And now I'm going to draw my actual countertop. So standard countertops are 1.5 inches. And it might be built up out of wood. It might have an extra overhanging edge here, or just an eased edge. And also generally doesn't just overhang the door, but it overhangs part of the hardware as well. So we usually have a specific overhang, and that's something we would dimension. You could do bullnose here and use circle, or you could have more of a waterfall edge and drop it off the bottom. And don't forget the backsplash and also a side splash in elevation if you have one. So the backsplash is usually a separate piece, so we would have 2 separate sections for that. And then finally side splash would be our thinnest line viewed in elevation. And then this is the drafting portion of the standard base cabinet. Now the next steps, we would go and annotate it and possibly cross-reference additional details in the next step. In this step, we're going to take our previously drawn detail and cross-reference additional details, annotate it with notes, and look at how to place it on the sheet. So in order to cross-reference detail, you need to create enlargements of the portions of it first. So things we usually enlarge is the detail of the countertop, so you can show exactly the details and the distances here and the mounting of the handle, and then you might look at more detail of the base and how additional base is applied and what the transitions are, and even the back of the counter, so the backsplash. So let's look at how we would do that. So you would not draw everything from scratch, you would use partially what you've already drawn and make a more enlarged view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this detail with detailing. Remember that most of what you're drawing is detailing, so if you don't use the detailing, everything goes away. And I'm going to rename it. What I'm going to do, this is still going to be in the base cabinet family of details, but I'm going to enlarge countertop. So the next thing, I'm going to pick scale. For a lot of the enlargements we use quarter scale, so that's 3 inches to 1 foot. And now you can see this is your entire area of the detail, and the whole cabinet no longer fits. So I'm going to center this countertop in my drawing portion, like this. And now I just need to crop off the rest of it that doesn't pertain to this particular section. So first I'm going to get rid of the side splash, and that would be too far off to the side to really be visible in this much of an enlargement. Next, I'm going to use the break line detail component. So in the library, there is the first section, the first category for the general category, has annotations like this break line, which if you hit the space on your keyboard will rotate, and you can place it on a section you want to cut off, and it automatically gives you a little cut line. And there, this is where I want to cut off my detail. So now in order to crop it, I no longer need the break line. First I'm just going to delete anything I can select by just selecting a box behind it. Now these sections I cannot just delete because they are already shown here. So I'm just going to crop them, and I'm not going to run them all the way to the line, but within, you can see the line has a little bit of a masking section. So as long as I keep it in that masking section, the line's still going to go behind the break line. Things in the views stack, you can stack them, bringing them to front and sending them to back. So if you take the break line and send it to back, all of this comes to the front. So always make sure that your break line is all the way on the front. It's the top thing of your view. Okay, and now cropping the lines I have here off to the side. Finally my field region. And now the last thing, I'm going to clean up my crop lines a little bit, making sure that the squiggle stays on whatever I'm cutting in the view. Okay, so now I have the enlarged detail, and I'll have its own set of annotations here, and I might add some more details that would not be visible on the overall view. Now going back to the original cabinet, let me show you how to cross-reference it. So under View, we would use Callout. If you're cross-referencing something that's in the same plane, like the detail we just drew, you would use Callout. If you're cross-referencing something that's perpendicular, something that you're cutting through, you would use a section. And after we select Callout, in drafting views, you automatically have to go to referencing out of view, since this is not three-dimensional, there's nothing to enlarge or cut. And I'm going to cross-reference the countertop right here. So when all of these are placed on the sheet, this will automatically populate. And if you're still getting the little symbol for callouts, just make sure you delete it from the type. Now in the same way, I created a toe kick detail showing the base and everything, so I can cross-reference that. So again, I'll go to the callout, cross-reference another view, and then cross-reference toe kick. Keep in mind, you need to draw the details first so you can select them. Now they don't have to be completely defined, but they do have to exist for you to cross-reference something. It's not like in a model view where you can create an enlargement by using the callout. So you need to draw these enlargements first by duplicating the view with detailing and then cross-reference. And beyond this, we would just add some dimensions and annotations. Now be careful with dimensions. Keep in mind not to duplicate anything you're showing on your elevations. So on the elevations, you probably have the height of the toe kick, and you have the overall height of the cabinet, and you probably have the height of the backsplash. We would not dimension that here. You're also not dimensioning things like exact mounting of the door hardware, which is shown in the enlargement. And because we're enlarging the toe kick, there's not necessarily even depth of the toe kick. So also the depth of the counter, that might be something we dimension here. You could dimension it on the overall floor plan, but because this is more standardized and you might need to dimension it everywhere, that is the type of thing that we might dimension in the elevation, in the detail. So going to the dimensions, and keep in mind where are you dimensioning to the cab, or are you dimensioning to the countertop overhang? So with a little overhang, this is 2 feet 1 inch. Then I might go into the countertop knowing, okay, here I'm dimensioning the overhang off of the face of the cab, and that's that 1 inch. So you can go back and forth and cross-reference and make sure you know what you're dimensioning. The overall height, you might want to note that that is called out somewhere. So this should be no higher than 210. And what I would do here, I would replace it with text and I would cross-reference C elevation. And then make sure that's dimensioned in the elevation. Other things, this is the adjustable shelf, so if it was fixed, I might dimension the location of that. A lot of these other dimensions are going to be in the enlargement, like what I showed with the countertop. The toe kick depth would be dimensioned here. So that's your 3 inches, and so on. Keep in mind that you can customize dimensions, so if you want them to show just in the inches, you would go to Edit Type, and you could create various subtypes. So you can create different accuracy levels, and you can also, under the unit format, note whether you want to use feet and fractional inches, just the inches, and what the circling is. In details, we actually use higher level of accuracy, so 1/16 inch accuracy is more appropriate for details. So in that case, my accuracy rounds to the nearest 16th of an inch. Don't ever have 30 seconds or anything like 1/28, 64s. Smaller fractions are really not measurable in reality, so the file will allow you to dimension that way, but it's really just it's really just showing that you don't know how to dimension things properly. So the base here is just drawn in line. You can also use the filled region for that. It would depend. If this was a wood base, then I would probably use a filled region showing a wood pattern. This denotes something like a rubber base or similar to that. So aside from the dimensions, other things that we might show here is calling out any of the portions of the detail. We just use the standard text with lines. 3/32 of an inch is the pretty standard. So I might have the adjustable height shelf. I'm gonna locate that, be very careful not to overlap any dimensions, and then add a leader line with an arrow, same 15-degree filled arrow. And then the only thing I would make sure to add that you show is that you line up all of the nodes. So for example here, so everything is, that's why you have this guideline. So here, lift it up, and note the side splash. Now I was asked, do I call out the finishes here? No, your finishes will be called out in elevation. So what you might say here is side splash beyond as scheduled. When you say as scheduled, that means somebody, whoever's reading this should reference your finish schedule. we would also use as scheduled for any other materials we're calling out. So on the bottom, we generally call out that this is floor finish, as scheduled, with again the notes that we are not showing a particular floor finish, and this cabinet might occur with different floor finishes. So it might have carpet, it might have resilient, it might just be on concrete somewhere. So just a floor finish as scheduled would be what we would call out. So again, on the details, note the information it's not noted otherwise. So you would note that you're bracing it to the wall here, that you're attaching it to the floor. It's fine to just say anchor to floor, anchor to wall. In the wall we would provide backing, and you don't have to actually call out the anchor sizes, the screws, and so on. In the proper construction sets, sometimes you would note them, sometimes you would leave that to your contractor to determine what the anchorage is, and they would show it on the shop drawings. For this level, what we're doing for the project, just noting where you have those anchorage points and attachment points is sufficient. And this is what the annotated and completed detail would look like. So the last step is, let's see what it looks like on a sheet. So now that we created the details, we are going to set them up on the sheet. And for the detail sheet, usually all of the details are on the same sheet, and you just have the little boxes which are going to line up with the border that you already created for your details. So under our drafting views, so we have our base cabinet that we created. So we're just going to start with that. And we usually start the numbering in a bottom right hand corner, sometimes top right hand corner. Both strategies are pretty common. And then make sure we align our border and the dash lines, and then the detail title goes into the bottom section of the detail that we created right here. Now how you organize them on the sheet, just try to keep details of the same millwork piece together, and if you have any enlargements of this, we would put them directly above, so we generally orient things vertically. And we would go in the order they occur. So I have a toe kick enlargement, and then completed this detail, but I have it set up, and you can set these things up on sheets before they're fully complete, and then add annotations and whatever else you need to. So I have toe kick, I have the overall first, then the toe kick. I'm adjusting my towel to line up to the one below, and then I have my countertop detail on top of it. So again, start with the overall on the bottom, and then the enlargements. And here I would not put the countertop on the bottom and toe kick on the top, because like I said, in reality they show up with the countertop on top and the toe kick on the bottom. And other than that, I would say as you move from one piece to the next, just make sure you skip over to the next row. So let's say that these are all of the details I have for this particular piece, and I'm detailing a completely different room, different piece. I would start in the next column. I would not start on the top here. So all of my overalls are along the bottom. And you might have some enlarged details that apply to multiples. So keep those towards the right hand side. So my next cabinet, for example, I have a cabinet for a break room that has the same set of enlarged details. That one could go to the left and just cross-reference these details, and then I could have all of the other cabinets that cross-reference these details here. Again, no hard and fast rule, just try to organize things in groups so things that relate to each other tend to sit next to each other. So now that we drew the details and learn how to annotate, cross-reference, and place them on sheet, we will look at some of the specialty drafting views, specifically at the wall type schedule, and then finally we'll look briefly at the finish schedule. So let's look at some of the specialty types of drafting views. First thing we're going to look at is our wall type schedule. which, while it's called schedule, it is actually just a drafting view. It's called schedule because you're scheduling information, but as far as from the Revit perspective, we're just going to be drafting a more elaborate detail. And the scale we're using is in between that quarter scale and the full cabinet scale, so it's 1.5 inch to 1 foot. And going to our Annotate tab, so on the symbol, we're actually going to use Legend template because we are actually going to have the title on the top of this one, and it's going to be formatted slightly differently, so we'll probably need a little bit more space for the text. And this particular detail is actually going to be at least 2 spaces wide, and depending how many of the wall types you have, it might be 3 or even 4 boxes long. So 2 are probably enough. If you have maybe 3 types, most of you for that purpose will at least have 3 boxes, and if you have 7 or more, it might stretch the entire 5 box length of a screen. So this for the setup. Now let's look at the library and insert some of the components we will be using. So you will find the studs under detail items in the library, and this is division 7 metals, so they are structural metal studs framing. And you will use both the seat studs and the channel studs in both section and the side view. So I'll go and load that. Also, in addition to that, under finishes is where you will find your gypsum board. So just your gypsum board has certain accessories, but really you will just need a section. And then finally I wanted to point out for the break line that we used in the previous step, as I said, division 1 general is where your break line is contained. So make sure you load all of those up before we get started. So now, having loaded all of those families, I'm in my Annotate tab, and the first thing I'm going to use the detail line to denote the perimeter of what we're drawing. So with the thick ground line, which was our 5 solid, I'm actually going to draw the ground line not quite at the edge of the view. I'm going to leave a little bit of space and draw where the ground line is going to be across. And then along the top, I'm going to draw the line for the underside of the deck. Now keep in mind, this is not to scale. So this entire distance in this particular view is only about 3 feet, where in reality you probably have something like 12 to 14 feet between those two. So we're going to utilize a break line because this distance is not to scale. And then we also need to use one more detail line to denote the height of the ceiling. So I'm going to use a thicker hidden line and set that off slightly. So this is showing where my typical ceiling height is. So that's for ceiling type partitions. The through ceiling partitions will go just through, and then deck height partitions will go all the way up top. And we'll use the break lines in between. And the first step I'm going to do is on the right hand side, I'm going to denote each one of those lines and explain what it is. So this is the finished floor slab. Up here we'll have underside of the deck. And then we're going to have ceiling. And you can put typical, noting that, yeah, you might have different ceiling height. If all of your ceiling heights firmly fall into two categories, so uh, all of the ceilings are either 10 feet or 8 feet, then you could draw both ceiling lines and note them such, or you can keep them generic like this. So now let's draw our wall. So the same way we created a structure, we're going to use the drafting components to create a structure here. So first we're going to start with the C-studs and use our standards. All of the standard stud sizes are here. So we're going to start with 3 5/8, and I want to make sure I actually use the side view to start to draw the whole height of it. So section just shows the section, and this is going to show my full height. So this is the partition that goes all the way up. So next thing, I'm going to use a channel stud and use the section of the same size. And that channel is going to go to the bottom, and make sure you layer it on top. Again, drafting components are layered, and then one is going to go to the top. And also, while you're here, make sure there is a little bit of space between the top of the partition. So we always leave a little bit of space up the top, and then you have the channel stud on top. And then we keep layering. So the next thing, we need our gypsum board. 5/8 is the standard thickness. Again, making sure you're leaving just a little bit of space between the lines. This again is a stretchable family, and it will automatically populate with the correct thickness and the section view. So because you have all of the standard pieces and components of a partition, you can draw this pretty easily. And then if you have additional layers of gypsum board, you draw the additional layers of gypsum board, and so on. Then insulation is its own command, so it's not a component, and you need to know the width. So 3.5 inches, just slightly shorter than the whole width of the wall. And then running all the insulation all the way through. So this is something you can draw fairly quickly. And then finally, don't forget using detail lines to show the attachment points. So I'm showing that I have anchorage on top, and then I'm attaching directly. So anchorage to bottom and anchorage directly to the top. So this was just one partition, and this was live, so this goes pretty quickly once you have all of the components. And then copy over your text. So this text is just going to be overall for the line. And then describe all of the parts. So we're going to have 3 5/8 of an inch steel stud. Then below that, we have 3.5 inch acoustical batt insulation. Then you will describe the layers of gypboard, and so on and so forth. And again, don't forget to mention that at the very bottom, this is anchored to the ground. And in this particular case, it would be anchored to the deck above as well. Now, what about a partition that's just through ceiling or ceiling height. So you can take all of the information you already drew and then just copy it over, making sure you leave enough space for your text. And then you'll keep copying them over as long. So as I said, a couple of partitions in a couple of boxes, 3, you might be able to fit them in 2 and make this text a little bit, so you can size the text to be a little bit more condensed. But generally you're going to need um, probably at least 3 and up to 5 boxes to have your schedule. Okay, so this one, let's say it doesn't go all the way up top, so we're not anchoring it here, but it's just through ceiling, so 6 inches through ceiling. So we're going to lower down our top plate, lower our insulation below it, and the stud again sits within the channel. And the gibboard, so we'll need to attach to that channel, so we're lowering the gibboard a little bit further down. And here as well. And then we're going to show our cross anchorage. So using a fairly thin line, since this is an elevation, you're going to show that you're cross bracing this to the deck above. And then slightly thicker line for the anchor. And then we can mirror the whole thing to the other side. So now this is our ceiling height partition. Last thing, as I mentioned, this is not full height, it's not to scale. So we'll need to show with the break line that it's not to scale. So that's the last annotation we need. It's our detail component. So if you have a double-sided line, you can use that. Otherwise, we're going to place the break line, then tip it the opposite direction and place the other break line. So now you have a double cut line. And as before, make sure you pull it in just a little bit. So it's cutting centered on the wall. And pull this one just a little bit too much. And then once I have this cut detail, I'll copy it onto all of my partitions, and then from there I know that this is not scaled, and then this is not scaled either, and here I might need to extend my break lines just a little bit. If you have ceiling height partition, this is going to be similar to this. So you'll keep going until you describe and denote all of your different partition types, and make sure that you notate and call out the size and the type of each one of the layers of one of your walls. And this is how you do a wall type schedule. So now that we looked at a wall type schedule, let's look at the final specialty type of the drafting view and create our finish type schedule. Now finish type schedule does not have a scale to it, so we're just going to use the 1-to-1, and it's really a drafting view. It could be even a legend, but as we talked before, legends, you can put in multiple sheets, and you shouldn't duplicate your finish type schedule, just to have it in one location, since it should be fairly substantial, taking up to half of a sheet, depending how many finishes you have. So we're creating the view, and then back to our notation. So using the symbol, and we're going to use our legend template again. And this is one of the instances where we'll start from the right hand side, left hand side, and then just make sure that you don't have any blank space left on the right at the end. And for finish schedule tags, so for the symbols that are going to be cross-referencing the finishes in your floor plans and the finished floor plan and the elevation, we actually use a symbol, which is the generic annotation. You can start from scratch, or you could actually use the keynote that you created before. And using this family as the baseline, we'll have different parameters here. You can just edit it and save as and start from there, or you can just start with your own generic annotation. Now there are different types of symbols, and your textbook does show a few different examples of finished schedules. What I'm asking you to do is to have 3 different types. One for floor finishes, one for wall finishes, and then finally there is going to be one for casework, millwork, or anything that's not really a floor or a wall finish. So 3 shapes. If you want to create a couple of additional ones for miscellaneous things, that's fine. Ceilings, we are denoting through hatch patterns, so you would be relating that to a particular hatch pattern, and it wouldn't necessarily have a symbol on a ceiling, although sometimes we do that as well. So that's a possibility. You could create one for ceilings. So I'm going to show you an example of 3 really simplified and streamlined type that I use, but again, the shape can be exactly like what you see in a textbook, and you can customize it somewhat as well. So this is the floor finish tag. So it's not a double stacked, it's a single label, and when you go into that label, you just have the floor finish parameter. And this one's actually set up so it could even be scheduled, but you just have a single text parameter. Just make sure everything is text like in a keynote, and it's 1/2 inch wide and 1/4 inch high. One thing to make sure with all of your symbols is that they are set up to approximately the same size, and also because we use leaders with these, you want to make sure that those guidelines that you started off with, same as in a keynote, are centered on whatever symbol you're using. So for wall finishes, so for floor, rectangular square shapes are common. For walls, oftentimes we use circles. This one is just like a pill capsule shape, so it has a semicircle on each side, and you can tell the same size, 1/2 inch wide, 1/4 inch high. The nice thing about these is if you need to show things just from a floor plan view, you can stack multiples within a single room, so they don't take up much space. And then a casework oftentimes is a diamond or a hexagon, so this is just an extended hexagon. Again, exactly same dimensions. So the label in this case is the casework finish, and make sure you're accounting for at least 3 letters if need be, and 2 numbers. And then here for the wall finishes, again the label is just the wall finish, and let's look at the parameters. So the parameters are going to be the same for all of them, just the name, it's an instant type, and make sure that it's a text, so you can type whatever you want in it. You can group it under other. And like I said, these are made so they can be scheduled. We are not scheduling them in an actual note block like we are with keynotes, so there's more flexibility here. We are just going to be using them to cross-reference our finishes from elevations and finished floor plans onto the finish type schedule. So back to the schedule. So I already have these symbols loaded. So I'm going to show you how to do multiple leader types when we go through annotations of elevations. But I'm just going to start with the floors. So how we organize them, the way they occur. So we have floor, then wall, then ceiling, and then all of the casework and other miscellaneous stuff. So you start with your floor, and first you need to come up with a code. So let's say you have carpet tile. This can be C1 or C01. It's nice to use 2 digits, so in case you have more than 10 items or 9 items, you can keep going, even if you don't think you might have them. Keep the first letter as simple, C for carpet, even if it's carpet tile. CT usually denotes ceramic tile, not carpet tile, so carpet tile sometimes becomes CPT. Again, simpler is better. Like I said, account for up to 3 letters in case you want to customize some things, some really specialty finishes, but this is plenty. And then we literally just create text, a text block. So first we have the general name, so this is carpet tile, and we could call it carpet tile 1 if it's the most common one. It could be general, or it could be accent 1 or accent blue, or maybe general. So just a generalized name, even if it's, we're going to specify it in a little bit more detail. And a couple of spaces. First, remember manufacturer. So let's say this is Shaw style. I don't have the carpet prepared, so whatever the name is here. Oh, triple X might be too funny, so then we might have a color or type, subtype, size. So this might be 24 inches by 24 inches or whatever else it is, so the module size. Installation, monolithic, ashlar, anything that we need to specify installation. If you have anything in addition, you can add that. You can have notes. If you have something like tile that requires grout, you can have grout color listed here. So all of the information you need to specify your finish. And then the only thing I would say, the title up top, you want to underline this and just cross-reference it to your symbol. So this is really what the schedule would look like. And then for your next type, copy it over, move on to C2. This might be our accent green. And then you would fill in the information and so on and so forth. Make sure you're staying somewhat within the margins. You can use your legend guidelines. You can create your own guideline just for the schedule. So you can probably, I have really small symbols, so I can probably move this further over and not use the line that I denoted for the legend. So however you need to stack it, as long as you provide all of the information and it's legible, it's easy to differentiate where one callout starts and ends and where the other one starts. And the size is really going to depend on how many finishes you have. Generally, it's the width of the sheet, and then we might stack it probably at least too high. And depending where you decided to put it on the sheet, it could be all vertical, but one vertical column is probably not going to be sufficient space. So it could run mostly horizontally, it could run mostly vertically. It is usually going to be at least 2 high stacked or 2 wide stacked, depending which orientation you have. And again, just make sure you have at least 3 symbols. You don't need a symbol for ceilings, although you could create one, and that you divide up your schedule by the order of, again, floor finishes, wall finishes, ceiling finishes, miscellaneous, and millwork finishes. And generally, the number 1, the first thing we list, is the most general thing. So under paint, your P1 would be your white paint or whatever off-white general color is, not your accent purple or something like that. So that is one standard, that whatever we start with is the most common solution. And then if you have carpets, and then you have resilient, and then you have sealed concrete, again, sort them in subgroups. So your PPD and the uniform sorting, where you place things in categories, is going to be now a good guideline that are specifying the exact specification manufacturer callouts for all the finishes on your project. And then just pop it on a sheet when you're done. And that was our other specialty type of the drafting view. Mostly we use drafting views for details, but as we covered here, your wall type schedule and just text only schedules like finish type schedule, your door hardware schedule is also going to be just text on a drafting view. And have fun drafting in Revit.